The day my son chose his new life and left me behind, I did not cry. I smiled. I smiled because I did not want him to see my heart breaking. I smiled because mothers learn early how to hide pain. And I smiled because, in that moment, I understood something painful but clear. He had already let go. I was standing at the doorway of his house, holding a small bag in my hands. Not a suitcase, just a bag with a few clothes and my medicines inside. The house was silent.
A single choice can change your life forever. Today, I'm sharing how betrayal forced me to choose myself when no one else would. Before the first chapter unfolds, please subscribe and hit like to help us reach others who might need to hear this. I'd love to know where you're watching from tonight. Leave your city name in the comments so I can welcome you personally. And now, the story begins.
Not the peaceful kind of silence, the kind that feels heavy, like something important has already ended. My daughter-in-law stood beside him. Her posture was calm, her face was polite. She looked at me the way people look at someone they do not hate but no longer need. "We think it's better if you stay somewhere else for a while," she said gently. Her voice was soft, there was no anger in it. That was the hardest part. I nodded before my heart could protest. I smiled before my eyes could fill. I said, "Of course." My son stood quietly beside her. His hands were in his pockets. His eyes were not on me. That was when I realized something I wish I had understood earlier. Sometimes children don't leave with loud words. They leave with silence. And sometimes silence hurts more than rejection. As I stepped out of that house, I did not feel abandoned in that moment. I felt something worse. I felt unnecessary. Setup: who I was before I became invisible. My name is Margaret. I am 62 years old, and for most of my life I was just one thing: a mother. My husband died when our son was 7. One day he was there, laughing at the table. The next day I was standing alone at his grave, holding my child's small hand. From that day on, life became very simple. There was no room for dreams, no time for loneliness. I had a child to raise. I worked small jobs, I saved carefully. I cooked meals that stretched for 2 days. At night, when my son slept, I sat beside his bed and watched his chest rise and fall. I told myself that as long as he was breathing, I could survive anything. I did not feel strong, I just did what needed to be done. As he grew older, he became my world without me realizing it. Every decision I made was about him. Every plan was built around his future. When he smiled, I felt rich. When he struggled, I felt helpless. I never thought of this as sacrifice. I thought of it as love. My son was kind, quiet, thoughtful. He respected me. He listened to me. When he went to college, the house felt too big for the first time. I kept his room exactly the same. I washed his clothes when he came home. I cooked his favorite meals even when he said he wasn't hungry. I told myself this was normal. This was what mothers did. Then he met her. The first time he brought her home, she smiled warmly and greeted me with respect. She called me ma'am. She helped clear the table. I liked her immediately. That night, after they left, I stood in the kitchen and whispered to myself, "She will take care of him when I can't." I did not know that one day she would decide where I belonged. After their wedding, my son asked me to move in with them. "You shouldn't live alone anymore," he said. "We have space." I was grateful, truly grateful. I packed my life into a few bags and told myself I was starting a new chapter. Their house was modern, clean, quiet in a different way. I tried very hard to be careful. I woke up early so I wouldn't disturb them. I kept my things small and neat. I asked before touching anything. At first, everything felt fine. We ate together, we talked politely, we laughed sometimes. I felt included. But slowly things changed. Not suddenly, not harshly, just quietly. She stopped asking me questions. She started doing everything herself. When I offered help, she smiled and said, "It's okay, I've got it." When I cooked, she thanked me politely but ordered food later. When I cleaned, she rearranged things silently. I told myself I was imagining it. After all, I was older. Maybe I was sensitive. My son became quieter too. He still respected me, but something was missing. He no longer shared his worries. He no longer asked my advice. When I spoke, he listened, but his mind felt elsewhere. Sometimes I would watch him listening to his wife speak, not interrupting, not checking his phone, just listening. I felt proud of him and afraid. That evening at dinner, my daughter-in-law spoke casually. "She likes my space," she said casually. My son nodded. "I understand." I lowered my eyes to my plate. For the first time, I felt like my presence was heavy, like the air changed when I entered a room. That night, I cried quietly into my pillow, not because anyone had hurt me, but because I felt myself slowly disappearing. After that day, I started noticing time more than anything else. The way mornings passed without greetings, the way evenings ended without conversations. Time moved forward, but I felt like I was standing still, watching my place in the house slowly disappear. I tried to remind myself that this was not my home anymore. It belonged to my son and his wife. I was only sharing space. That thought helped me stay calm, even when my heart felt heavy. Every morning, I woke up before sunrise, not because I needed to, but because I did not want to disturb anyone. I moved quietly, like a guest afraid of making noise. I would make tea for myself and sit by the window, watching the street wake up. Sometimes my daughter-in-law would walk past me without noticing. Other times, she would nod and smile briefly. Her smile was polite, but it no longer reached her eyes. I told myself not to take it personally. People get busy. Life changes. Still, something inside me felt unsettled. At breakfast, my son would scroll through his phone while eating. If I spoke, he listened, but his attention felt divided, like part of him was always somewhere else. Once I asked him, "Are you happy?" He looked up surprised. "Yes, Mom," he said quickly. "Of course." I nodded and smiled, but he did not ask me the same question. As weeks passed, small misunderstandings began to grow. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic, just moments that left behind quiet discomfort. One afternoon, I cleaned the living room while they were out. I arranged the cushions the way I always liked. When they came home, my daughter-in-law looked around and paused. "Oh," she said softly, "I had arranged it differently." I apologized right away. I was just trying to help. She smiled again. "I know," she said, "but please ask next time." Her words were gentle, but they stayed with me all night. I started asking before doing anything, before cooking, before cleaning, before even watering the plants. Slowly, I stopped doing those things altogether. The house began to feel less like a home and more like a place I had to earn my right to exist in. I noticed how my daughter-in-law spoke to my son. She did not raise her voice. She did not argue. She simply stated her thoughts calmly and confidently. And my son listened. When she suggested changes, he agreed. When she expressed discomfort, he adjusted. I watched from a distance, feeling proud of the man he had become, but also afraid, because I knew he had never listened to me like that. Once, during dinner, she mentioned that having too many people in the house felt overwhelming. "I like my space," she said casually. "I function better that way." My son nodded. "I understand," he replied. I lowered my eyes to my plate. I suddenly felt like I was taking up too much space just by sitting there. That night, I cried quietly in my room. Not because of what she said, but because of how easily he understood her. Days turned into months. I began spending more time outside. I took longer walks, I visited the park, I sat on benches watching families pass by. Sometimes I imagined myself as just another stranger in the crowd, someone with no connection to anyone around them. The house no longer welcomed me the way it once did. My room became my safe place, a small space where I could breathe without feeling watched. One evening, I heard my name mentioned behind the closed door of their bedroom. I did not mean to listen, but the house was quiet and the walls were thin. "She doesn't mean any harm," my son said. "I know," she replied, "but this is our life now. We need boundaries." Boundaries. That word stayed with me. I realized then that I was not being pushed out suddenly. I was being moved aside, gently and slowly. The next day, I tried to talk to my son. "Am I causing problems?" I asked him. He looked uncomfortable. "No, Mom," he said. "Why would you think that?" "I just feel like I'm in the way," I replied softly. He sighed and rubbed his face. "You're overthinking," he said. "Everything is fine." But everything did not feel fine. When someone tells you everything is fine, but your heart feels heavy, you learn not to trust words alone. After that conversation, he became even quieter around me, as if my question had made him uneasy. I stopped asking questions. Silence felt safer. One weekend, they invited friends over. I helped prepare snacks and clean the kitchen. When the guests arrived, my daughter-in-law introduced me politely. "This is my husband's mother." Not mom, not family, just a title. I smiled and greeted everyone, but inside, something tightened. Throughout the evening, I stayed in the background. I refilled glasses, I collected empty plates. No one asked me to sit with them. Later that night, when everyone had left, I stood alone in the kitchen washing dishes. My son walked in. "You don't have to do all this," he said. "I know," I replied, "but it keeps me busy." He watched me for a moment, then walked away. That was when I understood something painful. Being useful was the only way I still belonged. As time went on, I noticed how plans were made without me. Weekend trips, family visits, even holidays. I would find out later by accident. Once, I overheard my daughter-in-law saying, "It will be nice to have the house to ourselves." I knew then that I was not included in that picture. I started packing my things little by little, not because they asked me to leave, but because my heart was preparing itself. Old clothes, books, memories. Each item I folded felt like letting go of a piece of my past. I tried to tell myself that this was normal, that children grow up, that parents must learn to step back. But knowing something and feeling it are very different things. One evening, I sat at the dining room alone, long after dinner. The chairs around me were empty. The light above flickered softly. I remembered nights when my son would sit across from me, talking endlessly about his dreams, about the future, about what he wanted to become. Now, his future did not seem to include me. A few days later, my daughter-in-law asked me to sit with me. Her voice was calm, her face was serious, but not unkind. She said, "I want to talk about something." I nodded, my hands folded tightly in my lap. She spoke carefully, choosing her words slowly. "I feel like we all need space, and I think it would be healthy if you spent some time elsewhere." I felt my chest tighten, but I did not interrupt her. "This doesn't mean we don't care, it's just about balance." Balance. Another gentle word that felt heavy. I nodded again. "I understand," I said. She looked relieved. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I listened to the quiet hum of the house, the same house that once felt full of life. I realized then that the decision had already been made. The conversation was only a formality. My son did not come to talk to me that night. He did not knock on my door. He did not ask how I felt. And that silence told me everything I needed to know. The tension had grown not through anger, but through distance, not through harsh words, but through careful choices. I had not been pushed away, I had been gently set aside. And deep down, I knew something bigger was coming. Something that would change everything. The morning everything changed began like any other. There was no warning, no heavy feeling in the air, just the usual quiet that had become normal in that house. I woke up before sunrise, as I always did. I sat on the edge of my bed for a few minutes, gathering myself. My body felt tired, but my heart felt even heavier. I folded my blanket neatly. I straightened my pillow. Small habits that made me feel like I still had control over something. In the kitchen, I made myself tea and stood by the window. The sky was gray, and a light rain tapped gently against the glass. It felt like the world outside was as quiet as the one inside me. I did not know that by the end of that day, I would no longer belong there. My daughter-in-law came into the kitchen a little later. She greeted me politely, the way people greet someone they respect but no longer feel close to. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," I replied. We stood there in silence, sipping our tea. Then she cleared her throat. "I spoke to my sister yesterday," she said casually. "She said you could stay with her for a while if you want." Her words were gentle, almost thoughtful, but they felt final. I nodded slowly. "That's kind of her," I said. She smiled, relieved. "I think it will be good for everyone." For everyone. Not for me, not for my heart. But I did not argue. I had learned by then that arguing would not change anything. Later that day, my son came home early. He rarely did that anymore. He sat across from me at the dining table, the same table where he once did his homework while I cooked nearby. He looked tired, nervous. "Mom," he said, his voice low, "we need to talk." I already knew what he was going to say. Still, I let him speak. "I think it would be best if you stayed somewhere else for now," he continued. "Just for some time, until we figure things out." Figure things out. I smiled gently. "I understand," I said. He looked surprised. "You do?" "Yes," I replied. "I don't want to be a problem." He shook his head quickly. "You're not a problem. This is just life." Life. Such a simple word. Such a painful excuse. I wanted to ask him when life stopped including me, but I did not. Instead, I nodded and stood up. "I'll start packing," I said. He did not stop me. As I walked back to my room, my steps felt heavy. Not because my legs were weak, but because my heart was tired. I packed slowly, not because I had much to pack, but because every item held a memory. A sweater I wore when my son graduated, a book I read during long nights of worry, old letters tucked away in a small box. Each thing reminded me of who I used to be and who I had become. I heard them talking in the living room, not arguing, planning. It hurt more than anger ever could. When I finished packing, my room looked empty, bare, as if I had never lived there at all. I sat on the bed and took a deep breath. I felt calm in a strange way. Sometimes, when something hurts for too long, your heart goes quiet. That evening, we ate dinner together one last time. The food tasted the same, the plates looked the same, but everything felt different. No one mentioned the next day. No one spoke about my leaving. We talked about the weather, about work, about nothing that mattered. After dinner, I washed my plate and placed it carefully in the cupboard. My daughter-in-law watched me for a moment. "Thank you for understanding," she said softly. I nodded. "I always try to," I replied. She smiled and walked away. That night, I barely slept. I listened to the sounds of the house, the footsteps, the doors closing. I wondered if my son felt any pain at all, or if he had already moved on. In the early morning, I picked up my bag and stepped into the hallway. The house was quiet. I stood there for a moment, looking around. The walls, the pictures, the door. I remembered the first time I walked into that house. How hopeful I felt, how grateful. Now it felt like I was leaving a place where I had overstayed my welcome. My son came out of his room. "Let me drive you," he said. I nodded. The drive was silent. Rain streaked across the windshield. The road ahead blurred. I wanted to tell him so many things. I wanted to tell him that I missed him, that I felt invisible, that I was proud of him, even now, but my words stayed trapped inside. When we reached my sister-in-law's house, he parked the car. He turned to me. "I'll call you," he said. I smiled. "I know," I replied. He hugged me briefly, awkwardly. It was not the hug of a child clinging to his mother. It was the hug of a man in a hurry. I stepped out of the car, and just like that, I was alone. My sister-in-law welcomed me warmly. She made tea. She asked how I was feeling. I said I'm fine, but I was not. That night, lying in a different bed, I realized something painful. I had not lost my home that day. I had lost my place in my son's life long before that. The next few days passed slowly. My son did not call. I told myself he was busy. I didn't want to seem needy. I spent time with my sister-in-law, helping her around the house. She was kind, but kindness from others could not replace the bond I had lost. One evening, I sat alone on the porch, watching the sky turn dark. I thought about all the years I spent putting my son first, all the sacrifices I made without thinking twice. I did not regret them, but I wished he remembered them. I wished he remembered me. Weeks passed. Then one day, I received a message from him. "Hope you're doing okay." That was all. No apology, no explanation, just a sentence. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "I am," I wrote. "Take care." That was the moment I truly understood. Sometimes children don't leave because they're ungrateful. They leave because they're building something new. And sometimes, in building something new, they forget what helped them stand in the first place. I did not cry that night. I felt something else. Acceptance. The kind that comes when you realize holding on will only hurt you more. I decided then that I would stop waiting. I would stop hoping for calls that might never come. I would learn how to live again, not as someone's burden, but as my own person. The first few weeks after I left my son's house felt empty. Not quiet in a peaceful way, but quiet in a way that made every thought louder. I woke up each morning unsure of my place in the world. At my sister-in-law's home, life moved at a slower pace. She had her own routine, her own space, and she did not ask many questions. In a way, that helped. I did not have to explain myself. I did not have to pretend. Some mornings, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching people walk past. They all seemed to have somewhere to go, somewhere to belong. I wondered when I stopped feeling like that. I tried to keep myself busy. I helped with cooking, I cleaned, I folded clothes. But even while doing these things, my mind drifted back to my son. I wondered if he thought about me at all, if the house felt lighter without me. I did not ask. I did not call. I had learned that silence was safer than disappointment. One afternoon, my sister-in-law sat beside me. "You don't talk much," she said gently. I smiled. "I'm just tired," I replied. She nodded. Sometimes people understand more than they say. As days turned into weeks, I noticed something changing inside me. The pain was still there, but it was no longer sharp. It had become dull, like an old ache you learn to live with. I started taking short walks alone. At first, just around the block, then a little farther. The world felt different when I walked without waiting for anyone. I noticed small things again: the sound of birds, the smell of rain, the warmth of the sun on my face. For the first time in a long while, I was paying attention to myself. One evening, I found an old notebook in my bag. It was empty except for a few pages at the back. I began writing. Not stories, not letters, just thoughts. Things I never said out loud. Things I never allowed myself to feel. I wrote about my husband, about the day he died, about the fear of raising a child alone. I wrote about my son, about loving him too much, about losing myself while trying to protect him. Writing did not fix everything, but it made the weight feel lighter. A few weeks later, my phone rang. It was my son. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. "Hello?" I said softly. "Hi, Mom," he replied. There was a pause. "How are you?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said, and this time it was mostly true. He told me about work, about small things, nothing important. He did not ask if I wanted to come back. I did not offer. When the call ended, I felt calm. Not relieved, not hopeful, just calm. That surprised me. I realized then that I was no longer waiting for him to fix my cane. I was learning to carry it on my own. As months passed, I became more independent than I had ever been, not because I wanted to prove anything, but because I had no choice. I joined a small community group near my sister-in-law's home. We met once a week to talk and share stories. At first, I just listened. Then, one day, I spoke. I told them about being a mother, about letting go. No one judged me, no one rushed me. They listened, and that made a difference. One woman held my hand and said, "You're stronger than you think." I didn't know if that was true, but I wanted to believe it. Slowly, I stopped blaming myself. I stopped wondering what I could have done differently. I understood that love does not always mean staying close. Sometimes it means stepping back, even when it hurts. I learned how to say no, how to rest without feeling guilty, how to exist without apologizing. One afternoon, my son visited. He looked around the room where I was staying. "It's small," he said. "It's enough," I replied. He nodded. We sat together, drinking tea. There was still distance between us, but there was also respect. "I didn't realize how hard this was for you," he said quietly. I looked at him. "I didn't want you to. I wanted you to live your life." He lowered his eyes. "He hope you know I still care," he said quietly. "I know," I replied, and I meant it. Care does not always look the way we expect. When he left that day, I did not cry. I felt proud. Proud that I had survived something I never imagined. Proud that I was still standing. That night, I sat by the window again. But this time, I did not feel empty. I felt complete in a new way. I was no longer defined only by being someone's mother. I was a person with her own heart, her own story, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace with that. As time moved on, I stopped counting the days since I left my son's house. Not because the memory faded, but because it no longer controlled me. Life had found a new rhythm, one that did not depend on anyone else's choices. Some mornings I still thought of him first. That never really stopped. But the thoughts were softer now, like old photographs instead of open wounds. I learned how to enjoy simple moments again: a warm cup of tea, the sound of rain on the roof, the comfort of sitting in silence without feeling lonely. Loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. It took me a long time to understand that. One afternoon, I received a letter from my son. Not a message, a real letter. He wrote about guilt, about confusion, about trying to be a good husband while not knowing how to be a good son at the same time. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not explain his choices. He simply said, "I hope one day you understand." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my drawer. Understanding does not always mean agreeing. Sometimes it just means accepting that people are imperfect. A few months later, I visited their house for the first time since I left. Not to stay, just to visit. The house looked the same, but I felt different. I was no longer afraid of being unwanted. I was no longer trying to fit into a space that was not mine. My daughter-in-law greeted me politely. We spoke kindly to each other. There was no tension, no coldness, just distance that felt respectful. My son walked me to the door when it was time to leave. "Thank you for coming," he said. I smiled. "Thank you for inviting me," I replied. As I walked away, I realized something important. I had stopped waiting for him to choose me. I had chosen myself instead. That choice changed everything. I no longer felt bitterness. I no longer replayed old conversations in my mind. I had forgiven him, not because he asked, but because holding on to pain was costing me too much. Forgiveness did not bring us closer, but it freed my heart, and that was enough. Now, when people ask me about my son, I speak with warmth, not sadness. He's building his life, I say, and I'm building mine too. Sometimes love means stepping aside. Sometimes strength is quiet. I learned that being a mother does not mean losing yourself forever, and letting go does not mean being unloved. It just means life has changed. And change, even when it hurts, can still lead you home.